She inherited a property abandoned for 50 years, but turned it into a home. She never expected the letter to arrive. It came on a quiet morning, mixed in with old bills and advertisements, its envelope plain and slightly yellowed, as if it too had traveled through time before reaching her hands. At first, she almost threw it aside, but something made her pause. Her name was written carefully, not printed, and there was a seriousness in the way the ink pressed into the paper. Inside, the words felt unreal. A distant relative she barely remembered had passed away, and in the legal process that followed, a property had been left to her. Not money, not jewelry, just land and a house that had been abandoned for nearly 50 years. Her first reaction was confusion. She reread the letter several times, trying to recall any connection to this person. Memories were faint, childhood visits, maybe a face seen once or twice, nothing more. Why her? Why now? The questions felt heavier than the inheritance itself. Friends and family reacted quickly when she told them. Some laughed softly, calling it strange luck. Others warned her right away. An abandoned property, they said, was never simple. It meant paperwork, repairs, and costs that never ended. Most advised her to sell it as soon as possible before it became a burden. "Don't get emotionally involved," one relative said. "Old places only bring trouble." At first, she agreed with them. She had her own life to manage. Her days were already full with work, responsibilities, and small worries that never seemed to disappear. Taking on a forgotten house felt unnecessary. Still, something inside her remained unsettled. The property existed now in her thoughts, quiet but persistent, like a story half told. A few weeks later, curiosity pushed her to act. She decided to visit the place, telling herself it would only be once. Just a look, nothing more. After that, she would make a practical decision. The drive took longer than she expected. The town grew quieter the farther she went, roads narrowing, buildings thinning out. When she finally reached the address, she almost thought she was in the wrong place. Tall grass covered most of the land. Trees leaned close, their branches heavy and wild. The house stood at the center, worn and tired, its paint faded, windows dusty, and door slightly tilted. It did not look welcoming. It did not look valuable. It looked forgotten. She stood outside for a long moment, unsure whether to go closer. The air felt still, not scary, but heavy with silence. As she stepped forward, the ground crunched beneath her feet. Every step reminded her how long no one had walked here. The front door resisted when she pushed it open. Dust floated into the sunlight, filling the air. The smell was old wood, earth, and time. Inside, the house was dark but not empty. Broken furniture remained where it had been left decades ago. A chair leaned against the wall. A table stood in the corner, its surface scratched but strong. She felt a strange tightness in her chest. This was not just an abandoned building. This had once been a home. As she moved slowly from room to room, she imagined what life here might have been like. Morning light through the windows, voices echoing in the halls, simple routines that once filled the silence she now stood in. She didn't know these people, but their presence felt close, almost respectful, as if the house was waiting to be noticed again. In one room, she found a small cabinet. Inside were old papers, yellowed photographs, and a few personal items carefully placed together. The photos showed people smiling, standing in front of the same house when it was new. Children sat on the steps. Adults stood proudly nearby. It made her stop breathing for a moment. She realized then that the house had not been abandoned suddenly. It had been left behind slowly, likely due to circumstances beyond choice. Life had moved on, but the house had stayed, holding on to memories no one returned to claim. When she stepped back outside, the sun was lower in the sky. She felt different than she had that morning. The practical voice in her head still listed all the reasons to let go, but another voice had grown louder. It spoke of responsibility, of respect, and of something unfinished. That night she could not sleep. Images of the house filled her thoughts. She wondered how many seasons it had endured alone, how many storms had passed over its roof, how many years it had waited without complaint. The next few days were filled with paperwork and phone calls. She learned that the property had been untouched for decades, with no electricity, no water, and no updates of any kind. The costs would be high. The effort would be long. Everyone she spoke to reminded her again that selling it would be easier. But ease was no longer her goal. She returned to the house again, this time with more intention. She walked the land carefully, touching the walls, opening windows, letting fresh air inside. She noticed small details she had missed before: a strong foundation beneath the damage, solid wood hidden under layers of dust, and a layout that spoke of care and thought. She didn't make any promises to herself yet. She wasn't brave enough for that. But she did make one quiet decision. She would not rush. She would listen to what the place needed before deciding its future. Standing there, alone but steady, she understood something important. This inheritance was not an accident. It was a chance. Not just to rebuild a structure, but to give meaning to something the world had forgotten. As she locked the door and walked away, she glanced back one last time. The house stood silent, unchanged, but for the first time in 50 years, it was no longer alone. She returned to the house early one morning, carrying only a small bag, a notebook, and a quiet determination she had not felt before. The air was cooler, and sunlight touched the front of the house in a soft way, as if welcoming her back. This time she did not stand outside wondering what to do. She unlocked the door and stepped inside like someone who had permission. The dust was still there, the silence unchanged, but she felt different. She opened windows one by one, letting fresh air move through the rooms. The house responded slowly, as if waking from a long sleep. Light revealed details she had missed before: marks on the walls where frames once hung, a worn path on the floor where people had walked every day. These signs made the place feel human again. She decided to clean just one room. Nothing big, just enough to understand what she was dealing with. As she swept the floor, her broom hit something hard. She bent down and uncovered a small metal box hidden under debris. Inside were more papers, letters tied with string, and a thin diary with a cracked cover. She sat on the floor and opened it carefully. The writing was neat but faded. It belonged to a woman who had lived there long ago. The words were simple, honest, and full of everyday moments. Notes about cooking meals, fixing the roof, raising children, worrying about money, and hoping for better days. There was no drama, just life as it was lived. As she read, time seemed to disappear. She felt like a quiet guest listening to someone's memories. The house was no longer empty. It was filled with voices that had never truly left. Later that day, she walked outside and noticed an elderly neighbor watching her from across the fence. After a moment of hesitation, the neighbor came closer. "I never thought I'd see someone back in that house," the woman said gently. They talked for a long time. The neighbor remembered the family who lived there. She spoke of laughter in the evenings, children running barefoot, and shared meals during difficult years. She explained how life slowly pulled everyone away. Jobs ended. Health failed. People moved on. The house was locked one day and never reopened. Listening to her, she felt a deeper sense of responsibility. This was not just property. It was part of the community's memory. Over the next few weeks, she returned often. Each visit revealed something new: a hidden shelf, a tool left behind, a small garden space now covered in weeds. She wrote everything down in her notebook, learning the house piece by piece. She didn't rush. She wanted to understand before changing anything. The past felt close, but it did not feel heavy. Instead, it felt patient. One afternoon, she found a photograph tucked inside a book. It showed the house when it was new, bright and strong. The people in the photo stood proudly in front, their faces calm and hopeful. She studied the image for a long time, comparing it to the house around her. The difference was large, but the structure was still there. The heart of it had survived. That night she sat at home thinking about everything she had learned. The easy choice was still there. She could sell the land, walk away, and never look back. But that thought no longer brought relief. It felt like leaving a conversation unfinished. She began to research. She learned about restoration, costs, and timelines. The numbers were not comforting, but she also learned about others who had taken on similar journeys. People who saved old places not because it was easy, but because it mattered. Doubt still visited her often. Some days she felt confident. Other days she felt overwhelmed. But the more she learned, the clearer one truth became. If she walked away now, she would always wonder what could have been. So she made a decision, quietly and without announcement. She would try, not all at once, not perfectly, but honestly. Her goal was not to make the house impressive. She wanted it to be lived in again. She wanted warmth where there had been silence, light where there had been darkness. She returned to the house once more, standing in the center of the main room. She placed her hand on the wall and closed her eyes. The past and present felt close, connected by her choice. The house had waited for 50 years. It could wait a little longer, but now it had someone who cared. She began the work slowly, knowing that rushing would only lead to mistakes. On her first serious day, she arrived with simple tools, gloves, and a clear plan written in her notebook. The house looked the same from the outside, worn and silent, but to her it already felt different. It was no longer a forgotten place. It was a project, a responsibility, and in some quiet way a partner in her journey. She started with cleaning. Dust, broken pieces, and years of neglect filled every corner. She worked room by room, sometimes spending an entire day on just one small space. Her body ached at night and her hands grew rough, but she felt a strange satisfaction. Every cleared floor and wiped surface revealed something solid beneath. The house was damaged, but it was not defeated. As days turned into weeks, she began to notice patterns. Some walls were stronger than others. Certain beams had held firm despite time and weather. She realized that the house had been built with care. Someone long ago had put effort and hope into it, believing it would last. That belief gave her strength. Money became an early challenge. Repairs cost more than she expected. Supplies added up quickly. There were moments when she sat in the quiet house, staring at her notes, wondering how she would continue. Each decision felt heavy. Fix this first or that. Save money here or spend more to avoid problems later. She learned to ask for advice. She spoke with builders, repair workers, and people who had restored old places before. Some were kind and helpful. Others warned her honestly about the difficulties ahead. She listened to all of them, then made her own choices. This was her journey, and she had to own every step. One afternoon, while working on a damaged floor, she found something unexpected. Under a loose board was a small box wrapped in cloth. Inside were a few coins, a handwritten note, and a simple ring. The note spoke of saving for the future, of hope that the house would always be a safe place. She held the items carefully, feeling the weight of someone else's dreams in her hands. That discovery stayed with her. On days when she felt tired or unsure, she remembered the note. The house had once been built on hope. She was not wrong to bring that hope back. Progress was slow, and setbacks were common. Rain damaged a section she had just cleaned. A wall she thought was strong needed more work than planned. Each problem tested her patience, but with every challenge she learned. She became more confident, more capable. She stopped seeing the house as broken and started seeing it as a teacher. Neighbors began to notice the changes. They waved as she arrived. Some stopped to talk. A few offered small help or shared stories about the area. The house, once avoided, was becoming part of the community again. That made her feel less alone. There were evenings when she stayed late, sitting on the floor with the windows open, watching the light fade. The house felt calmer then, as if it appreciated the care. She often thought about how much her own life had changed since receiving that letter. She had learned patience, courage, and trust in herself. The work was far from finished. Many rooms still needed attention. Many decisions still waited. But the hardest step had already been taken. She had started. One night, as she locked the door and turned back toward her car, she looked at the house and smiled. It still had scars. It still needed time, but it was no longer abandoned. It was becoming a home again, one careful step at a time. As the months passed, the work became heavier, not just on her body but also on her mind. The excitement she once felt was still there, but now it shared space with tiredness and worry. Each day brought new problems she had not planned for. Just when she felt one area was improving, another issue appeared, asking for attention and money. One morning, after heavy rain, she arrived to find water on the floor of a room she had just repaired. The sight made her heart sink. All the effort, the time, and the care felt wasted in that moment. She stood there silently, listening to the sound of dripping water, fighting the urge to give up. It would have been easier to walk away than to fix the same thing twice. She sat down and took a deep breath. Then she did what she had learned to do. She faced the problem step by step. She traced the leak, found the weak spot, and made a plan to repair it properly this time. It took longer and cost more, but when the rain came again and the room stayed dry, she felt a quiet victory. Paperwork became another challenge. Old records were missing, and rules had changed over the years. She spent hours visiting offices, filling forms, and waiting in lines. Some days ended with no progress at all. The process was slow and frustrating, and it tested her patience more than physical work ever had. There were moments when she felt alone in her efforts. Friends were busy with their own lives. Some still believed she was making a mistake. Their words were not unkind, but they carried doubt. She listened politely, then continued anyway. By now, she knew that not everyone had to understand her choice. The house itself continued to surprise her. Beneath old paint, she found strong wood that only needed care. Behind a damaged wall, she discovered solid structure that had held up for decades. Each discovery reminded her that appearances can be misleading, and that strength often hides beneath wear. She began to bring small personal touches into the space. A chair placed near a window. A simple table cleaned and repaired. These small changes made the house feel warmer. It was no longer just a work site. It was slowly becoming a place to rest, think, and breathe. One evening, as she worked outside, a neighbor approached and thanked her. The neighbor said the house looked alive again and that it gave the street hope. Those words stayed with her. She realized her effort mattered beyond herself. It inspired others, even quietly. There were days when exhaustion caught up with her. She questioned whether she had taken on too much. But each time she considered stopping, she looked around and saw how far the house had come. It stood stronger now, more open, more welcoming. As winter approached, she worked harder to prepare the house for colder days. She sealed gaps, fixed doors, and made sure the structure could handle the season. It was difficult but necessary. When the first cold nights arrived and the house held firm, she felt proud. Through every challenge, she learned resilience. The house tested her limits, but it also showed her her own strength. She was no longer just restoring a building. She was rebuilding her belief in herself. By the end of this phase, the house was not finished, but it was stable, safe, ready for the final steps. And she was ready too, stronger than she had ever been. The final stage of the journey did not begin with a big moment. It started quietly, like everything else had. One morning, she arrived at the house and stood still for a long time looking around. The walls were stronger now. The floors were clean and steady. The windows let in light instead of dust. For the first time, the house did not feel like a project. It felt like a place ready to be lived in. She moved more slowly these days, not because she was tired, but because she wanted to enjoy each moment. There were fewer heavy repairs left, but many small details still needed care. She painted with patience, choosing soft colors that made the rooms feel calm. She fixed handles, cleaned corners, and adjusted doors so they opened smoothly. Each small task felt meaningful, like placing the final pieces of a long puzzle. She brought in simple furniture, nothing fancy, just pieces that felt right. A table near the window where sunlight rested in the afternoon. A chair where she could sit and think. A shelf for books and memories. As each item found its place, the house seemed to relax, as if it finally understood its purpose again. One evening she cooked a simple meal inside the house for the first time. The smell filled the air, warm and familiar. She sat at the table alone, eating slowly, listening to the quiet. It was not an empty silence anymore. It was peaceful. That was the moment she realized the house had become a home. She thought about the people who once lived there. The family whose laughter once filled the rooms. The woman who wrote in the diary. The hands that built the walls. She felt grateful to them, even though she had never met them. She believed they would be happy to see the house alive again. Neighbors began visiting more often. Some came just to look. Others brought small gifts, plants, or kind words. They shared stories, smiled, and told her how much the place had changed. The house, once avoided, had become a symbol of care and hope. It reminded people that forgotten things could still matter. She spent her first night there quietly. She slept lightly, listening to the sounds of the house settling. The wind moved through the trees outside. The walls held firm. There was comfort in knowing she had given the place another chance, and it had accepted her in return. In the following weeks, she added personal touches that made the home truly hers. Photos on the wall, curtains that moved with the breeze, plants that slowly grew in the garden outside. Each addition felt natural, not forced. The house welcomed these changes as if it had been waiting for them. She also took time to reflect on her own journey. Before the letter arrived, her life had felt busy but shallow. Days passed quickly, filled with routine. This project had changed her. It taught her patience, courage, and the value of commitment. She learned that meaningful things often require effort, time, and trust. There were still moments of doubt, even now. Some repairs would always be needed. Old houses never stop asking for care. But she no longer feared that. She understood that caring for something living, even a house, is an ongoing relationship, not a finished task. One afternoon, she sat on the front steps and watched the sunset. The same steps where children once sat long ago. The sky changed color slowly, and the house stood quietly behind her, strong and steady. She felt a deep sense of peace. This was never about proving anything to others. It was about answering a call she felt the moment she opened that old letter. The inheritance had not been money or land. It had been purpose. The house, abandoned for 50 years, now held life again. And in saving it, she had found something she did not know she was missing. A place where past and present met, and where she could finally feel at home. She closed the door gently that night, not to leave, but to rest. The house was no longer waiting. It was living, and so was she.